The door sealed behind me before I even sat down, and that was the first sign that this meeting was not going to end the way I wanted. Overseer Vresh stood on the other side of a black metal table, 4 eyes moving independently, one fixed on me, one on the door, 2 somewhere unreadable. Behind him, 2 guards in gray armor did not move, did not blink, did not look like they intended to let me leave without an answer. "You have refused 3 times, Vresh said. "The assembly does not enjoy repeating itself a 4th. "Then don't repeat it," I said. "My answer is still no. Your brother's mate stands unclaimed. On Ashaya Prime, this is not permitted. A widow of a bonded warrior must be absorbed into a new household within 1 turn of the season, or she loses every protection this station grants her. Ration priority, medical access, shelter tier. You understand this?" "I understand you're threatening her to force my hand." "I am stating law," Vresh said, and his voice did not rise, which somehow made it worse. "You have 3 days remaining. On the 4th, Ilsa Grant becomes unclaimed permanently, and there is no petition, no exception, no mercy clause that reverses that status once it is set. I am not your enemy, human. I am the only reason you still have 3 days at all." I stood up so fast, the chair scraped loud against the floor, and one of the guards shifted his weight, just enough to remind me who held the room. "I'll find another way," I said, and walked out before Vresh could answer, because I did not trust myself to hear whatever came next. "My name is Aiden Cole. 4 months ago, my brother Adrian died, defending a mining relay from what the Kalen called a raid. 3 months ago, I stood at his memorial and did not cry, because crying felt like agreeing that he was really gone. And 2 days ago, I was told that his wife, a woman I had known for less than a year, was now legally mine to claim, like a debt he had left unpaid at the end of his life. I did not want a wife. I wanted my brother back. Those were not the same problem, and no law on this station seemed to understand the difference. I found Ilsa in the observation corridor above the relay's cooling stacks, the one place on the whole station where the machinery was loud enough to drown out my own thoughts. She was standing at the window with her arms crossed, watching heat shimmer rise off the vents, and she did not turn around when I stepped up beside her. "They gave you the same deadline they gave me," she said. "You knew." Vresh visited me first. Cowards always start with the person who has less power to fight back. She finally looked at me, and her eyes were dry, controlled, the eyes of someone who had spent 4 months rationing her own grief so carefully that it no longer showed. "You don't have to be noble about this, Aiden. I can survive losing a housing tier. I have before. You shouldn't have to survive anything. This is insane, a law that turns grief into a countdown. It is their law, not ours, and out here that is the only kind that matters." She turned fully toward me now. "But you standing in front of the assembly refusing them, again and again, costs you something too. It costs you the trade standing Adrian spent 2 years building. It costs you goodwill you cannot afford to lose. I know exactly what a rejected petition does to a human file in this system." "So what? I just agree? I marry you because a bureaucrat with 4 eyes says grief has an expiration date?" "No," she said, and something shifted in her voice, quiet and deliberate. "Come to the bonding chamber tonight, just the 2 of us. Before you throw away everything your brother built by refusing to understand what you're actually being asked to protect." I did not like the sound of that. I liked it even less, because some part of me, some part I did not want to admit existed yet, trusted her enough to go anyway. The bonding chamber was empty at that hour, dark except for a low blue light along the floor seams, the ceremonial glass at the far end reflecting nothing back at us. 100 other bondings had happened in that room, recorded, filed, approved. Ours had not started yet, and already it felt different. Ilsa walked past the ceremonial dais without pausing at it, went straight to the door, and pressed her palm to a panel beside the frame. I heard a sound I had never heard in that room before, a low mechanical seal, heavier than the ceremonial half-latch that let bonding couples step in and out during a service. "What did you just do?" I asked. "Sealed it," she said, "fully. Not the ceremonial lock, the real one. This room has one blind spot in the entire station's monitoring grid, and it is inside these walls. once that door is fully shut. Adrian found it by accident, 11 months ago. He never told the assembly, he barely told me. My chest went tight in a way that had nothing to do with grief, and everything to do with the sudden, sharp feeling that I did not know my brother nearly as well as I thought I did. Ilsa, what is going on? She knelt at the base of the dais, pressed her fingers into a seam along the floor plating that looked, to my eyes, like nothing more than a structural joint. It came up easily, like it had been opened many times before. Beneath it sat a drive core the size of a closed fist, wrapped in cloth soft enough to be a child's blanket. Adrian didn't die stopping raiders, she said. There was no raid that night. The story the assembly filed is not true. The room seemed to get smaller. Then what happened to him? He died stopping an extraction team, she said. A Kalen retrieval unit sent quietly, without station notice, to remove something from this relay before anyone else knew it existed. He held the access corridor alone for 11 minutes so a transport could clear the jump lane. He did not die defending cargo, Aiden. He died defending this. She held the drive up between us, and in the low blue light, it looked almost too small to have cost a man his life. What is it? Earth, she said simply. Not the planet. What's left of it? The full continuity archive. Genetic libraries, seed catalogs, language records, court histories, cultural files, everything the last engineering teams compressed and backed up before the evacuation ships burned atmosphere and left. Adrian's father smuggled the original copy off-world, inside a relay buoy nobody thought to search. Adrian spent 3 years afterward keeping it moving, one station to the next, always half a step ahead of Kalen cataloging crews who believe that anything belonging to an unaffiliated refugee species falls automatically under their administration. I sat down on the edge of the dais because my legs no longer felt entirely reliable. Why would they even want it? Because a species that controls your history controls your leverage, Ilsa said. Adrian understood that before either of us did. Do you know why he asked for a bonding ceremony with me instead of simply working alone? Tell me. Because bonded households on this station are not audited the same way single-occupant quarters are. It is a privacy exemption written into their own law, meant for family units, never meant to protect something like this. He married me for cover, Aiden. Not only for that, but partly for that. He was planning to tell you everything the week he died. He kept waiting for a moment that felt safe enough, and it never came, because there is no safe moment when you are carrying something this size. I looked at the small wrapped core in her hands, at the woman who had spent 4 months grieving alone, while also guarding the single most dangerous secret either of us had ever heard, and felt something in my chest crack open that had nothing to do with the marriage law and everything to do with shame. You've been holding this alone the entire time. I had no choice. The moment Adrian died, I became the only person who knew where it was hidden and why it mattered. I could not tell station security. I could not tell the assembly. I certainly could not simply hand it over and hope the next set of hands treated it with the same care he did. So you let me refuse a marriage for 2 days while carrying this? I let you refuse a marriage you did not understand, because the fewer people who knew, the safer the archive stayed, and I was not yet certain I could trust you with it. She met my eyes directly. I am certain now. That is why we are standing in the one room, on this entire station, where no drone, no microphone, and no assembly official can hear a single word we say. I thought about 3 days spent arguing principle at a table with an overseer who had 4 eyes and no patience. I thought about my brother, teaching an entire alien government to look the other way, using nothing more than a wedding ring and a closed door. So the marriage was never really about grief timelines or housing tiers, I said slowly. It's the only legal shelter this archive has left. Exactly that, Ilsa said. Adrian built one shelter for it. When he died, that shelter needed a second occupant, or it collapses entirely, and the assembly begins auditing my quarters the moment my widow status expires. 3 days from now, Aiden. That is not a marriage deadline. That is a discovery deadline. For a long moment, neither of us spoke, and the low hum of the chamber's dormant systems felt louder than it had any right to be. Why show me now? I finally asked. Why not 2 days ago? before I stood in front of Vresh, refusing everything. "Because I needed to know you would refuse first," she said. "A man who agrees to marry a stranger without asking a single question is not a man I can trust with something this size. You fought them 3 times before you ever knew what you were fighting for. That told me everything I needed to know about how hard you would fight once you did know." I almost laughed, though nothing about the moment deserved laughter. That's a strange kind of test. It's the only kind that matters out here. She wrapped the drive core carefully back into its cloth and set it into my hands instead of her own, and the weight of it surprised me, heavier somehow than its size suggested, or maybe that was simply the weight of understanding what it actually held. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we go back to Vresh," she said, "and we agree to the bonding. We let the assembly believe they won a small, tidy victory over 2 stubborn humans who finally saw reason. We make the ceremony as forgettable as possible. No unusual requests, no delays, nothing that draws a single extra second of attention. And we keep this room's secret exactly as sealed as it is right now. And after the ceremony, we finish what Adrian started. There are 2 more relay stations along this jump corridor, holding pieces of the same archive, split apart deliberately, so no single seizure could ever take the whole thing. Adrian was moving toward consolidating them somewhere permanent before he died. Somewhere far enough from assembly reach that it could simply exist, quietly, without needing a marriage, or a blind spot, or a closed door to protect it. You know where. I know where he was heading. I do not know if he ever arrived. That is something we would have to find out together. I looked down at the wrapped core in my hands, then up at her, and understood for the first time that the fear I had been carrying since Vresh first said the word marriage had nothing to do with Ilsa at all. It had been fear of replacing my brother, of stepping into a life that was supposed to be his, of pretending love where there was only obligation. But this was not that. This was a mission he had started and never finished, and the woman standing across from me was not a debt I owed him. She was the only other person alive who understood exactly what needed protecting, and exactly what it had already cost. "Okay," I said. "Let's go tell Vresh he can start the paperwork." Something in Ilsa's shoulders loosened, just slightly, the first real release of tension I had seen in her since the memorial. "You understand this changes nothing about the ceremony itself. It still has to look completely ordinary, boring even. The moment it looks like more than a routine widow claim, we lose the one advantage we have. Then let's make it the single most unremarkable bonding this station has ever recorded." She almost smiled, and for the first time since I had walked into that chamber, the low blue light along the floor did not feel like a warning. It felt like the first quiet moment of something that might, eventually, become steady ground. We left the chamber together, sealed the door behind us the ordinary way, and walked the long corridor back toward Vresh's office in silence, though it was not the same silence as before. 3 days earlier, I had walked these same halls furious, certain I understood exactly what was being demanded of me, and exactly why I refused it. Now I understood almost nothing the way I had thought I did, and somehow that made the path ahead clearer, not harder. Vresh did not look surprised when we entered his office together. Perhaps he had expected this outcome from the beginning, the way bureaucracies often expect exhausted people to eventually choose the path of least resistance. He slid a datapad across the table without comment, and Ilsa signed it first, then handed it to me. "Wise," Vresh said, 4 eyes settling briefly on both of us at once. "The assembly values order over sentiment. You will find life easier now that you have chosen order." "I'm sure we will," I said, and did not let a single flicker of what I actually felt reach my face. The ceremony 3 days later was, as promised, forgettable. A short recitation, a formal exchange of station registry numbers, a single witness from the assembly's civil office, who looked bored throughout the entire 10 minutes it took. No music, no gathering, nothing that would give a single observer reason to remember it later. Exactly the kind of quiet, procedural non-event that lets something far larger continue existing undisturbed underneath it. Afterward, Ilsa and I stood together in the corridor outside the registry office, and for a moment neither of us said anything at all. "It's done," she finally said. "It started," I corrected. "Adrian's part is done. Ours is just beginning." She looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable crossing her face, and then nodded once, like a decision had settled somewhere deep and would not be reopened. There is a transport leaving for the outer relay in 6 days. Standard supply run. Nothing unusual about 2 newly bonded workers requesting a station transfer to start fresh somewhere quieter. Nothing unusual at all, I agreed. We walked back toward our shared quarters, the corridor lights washing pale gold over the metal floor, and for the first time since the funeral, the life I was walking into did not feel like a stranger's obligation drafted onto my shoulders. It felt like mine, ours, something worth protecting, quietly, patiently, one sealed door and one unremarkable ceremony at a time, exactly the way my brother had done it before us, and exactly the way we intended to finish it now. 6 days later, the transport cleared the station's outer ring without incident, carrying 2 names on its manifest that meant nothing to anyone watching, and one small, carefully wrapped drive core that meant everything, hidden where no inspection would ever think to look. Somewhere ahead of us, on a relay station Adrian had never reached, the next piece of what he died protecting waited to be found. Behind us, an assembly overseer filed our bonding as routine, closed the file, and moved on to the next case, never once suspecting that the quiet marriage he had forced into existence to satisfy a law about grief timelines had become the single most important shelter humanity had left. I did not know, that night in the observation corridor, that refusing a marriage would end with me protecting the last full record of everything my species had ever been. I only knew that my brother had trusted a closed door and a quiet woman with something larger than either of us, and that trust, once it reached me, was not something I intended to let go of. Ilsa had shown me one secret behind one sealed door, and it had turned an obligation into a mission, a stranger into a partner, and a law meant to erase grief into the very thing that let us carry it forward together. The transport carried us into the dark toward the next relay, and for the first time in 4 months, I was not running from what I had lost. I was finally moving toward finishing what it had cost.